Turn over to Exodus chapter 12. We're going to start there. Exodus chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 29. We left off last week talking about the Passover meal and putting the blood over the doorposts so that the death angel, as some call it, the destroyer, it's called in some translations, would pass by the Israelites and would not kill the firstborn of the Israelites. And that theme grows from there. That's one of the things that I learned this week, is that that's not the end of it. There's a comparison going on still between what God is doing for the Israelites and what he's doing to the Egyptians. So I want us to start in Exodus 12, verse 29, read all the way down to verse 42, and then we're going to skip over and read a little bit in chapter 13. Exodus 12, beginning in verse 29. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all of his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was a loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Get up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go, but also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country. Otherwise, they said, "We will all die." So the people took their dough before the yeast was added, carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs, wrapped up in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. The length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to that very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord through the generations to come. So all of the firstborn in Egypt die. The firstborn in Israel, at least all of those who followed the instructions and put the blood on the door mantles, are saved. Now look down at chapter 13, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether it is human or animal." So we have the first real comparison. We see all of the firstborn of Egypt being killed, not just humans, but also the animals. And if you remember some of the plagues, I'm not sure where they found the animals. There was the plague of the hail, killed a bunch of them. They had I think the King James refers to it as a murrain. They had boils that broke out on the animals, and they died from that. So lots and lots of the animals in Egypt have already died, but the firstborn among the animals died as well. So you've got those who do not belong to the Lord, and now in chapter 13, Moses says, "I want you to consecrate to me all of the firstborn in Israel, whether it be human or whether it be livestock." Now we don't get a list of responsibilities or a list of how to consecrate them in this passage. But when you get to Mount Sinai and God gives him the law, there is a rather lengthy passage telling how that is to be done. And It even goes into enough detail to say if you're too poor to do it this way, then you can substitute this. So a couple of things that might help you make the connection. The word in the Latin for this is sacer, and it's the same word from which we get sacraments. So it's something that's set aside, that's dedicated, devoted, made sacred by this activity. What happens later among the Israelites is that when you had a child, you had to make a sacrifice instead of the child. So it might be a lamb, it might be a bullock, or in the case of Jesus, he was redeemed, consecrated, purified by the offering of 2 turtle doves. So when they went to the temple, when we meet Anna and Simeon, the old people at the temple that have been waiting to meet Messiah, those folks have been around waiting for him. When Jesus meets them, or when Joseph and Mary meet them, it's because they're there to offer sacrifices. It has implications in that when you are born, you become holy unto the Lord. And particularly if you are the firstborn, because your family lineage is going to pass through you. So, if your grandfather was consecrated and your father was consecrated and you're consecrated and your kid is consecrated on down the line, there is that continuous dedication of these children to God. So we've got 2 things going on with the Israelites. You've got circumcision at 8 days, and then you've got a sacrifice to redeem or to consecrate the children at about 30 or 60 days, depending on whether it's a male or a female. So you've got lots of things that put them in the camp of Israel, right? If you do this, you're part of the people. If you do this, you're part of the people. The Egyptians are definitely not part of the people, complete outsiders. Okay? The second thing that I want us to notice is that God is not finished with Pharaoh. He's killed his dynasty, right? He killed his firstborn. He has killed the firstborn of all of the nations, so everybody's lineage has been interrupted. You don't have anybody in Egypt who can point to the next in line, right? They're having to skip over. And historically, there's a little bit of evidence of that, but by the way, there is 0 secular history and 0 archaeology as far as the Exodus from Egypt is concerned. They just have not come up with anything solid that they can point to and say, okay, the Israelites camped here, or this is where they crossed the Red Sea. There are a couple of people who have tried to do that. They're not very well received. Typically, people think that maybe they've drummed up some things that they've come up with. But we know where they didn't go. That's the one thing that we're sure of. The Red Sea was definitely not the shortest route to go to Canaan. There was a road that went along the coastline of the Mediterranean. And about every 100 miles or so, there was an outpost, a check station. So if you went along that road, you would first run into some of the outlying Egyptian troops, and eventually you would run into the the Philistines. I wanted to say Syrophoenicians, that's close enough, but the Philistines owned that area, and they were the biggest and the baddest in Canaan about this time. When God takes them across the Sinai Peninsula and comes in from the east across the Jordan River, he does a couple of things. He keeps them from having to get into fights, into war very early. He says, I don't want to take them along the road that goes by the sea because they'll run into a battle and they'll get scared and they'll go running back to Egypt. So we're going to go this way. And he takes them across the Red Sea and around the Sinai Peninsula and across the Jordan River from the east. The people that they fight first, I mean, they're no pushovers, but the battles that they have prior to ever meeting the Philistines, they've already won a bunch of battles before they settle in the land. We don't really run into the Philistines until you get like to the period of the Judges. Samson was battling against Philistines. You get into Saul and David. They fought a lot against Philistines. And they were a very formidable group. They had three main capital cities, and they were well organized and just really a difficult opponent. So God says, well, let's just skip them for a while. So he takes them around through the Sinai and across from the east. That road was well built and well maintained, and if God had decided to take them that way, he could have had them in Canaan inside of a couple of months. How long does it take them to cross the border into Canaan? Over 40 years. Right? He gets them there faster than 40 years, but then they don't have enough faith to take it, so they have to wander around long enough for that generation to die off. So we go the long way around. Look at Exodus 13, beginning in verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter, because God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle. When was the last time that Israel had been in a battle? Right. Never. As a nation, it's been 430 years that they've just been in Egypt. A lot of that time they've been slaves, so they haven't had a standing army. They're not trained for warfare, but they go up as an army. That may mean that they were ready for whatever was about to face them, but what we're going to find out is that that's not true at all. They weren't ready for anything, and time after time they show themselves to be a little bit on the cowardly side. Verse 19, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and you must carry my bones up to you, or up with you, from this place. So the oath takes place close to 400 years previously. Moses feels responsible for fulfilling it. Right? I don't know if God reminded him or if the people had just talked about it for 400 years. You see that little tomb over there? That's Joseph, and if we ever leave, he wants to go with us. So they take Joseph and carry him along. There is actually an archaeological dig that took place, and they found a large home with a small mausoleum-type burial place that had been broken into. And where it had been broken into, they found 3 spots. And so some people have conjectured, well, that's Joseph and, I forgot, anyway, his 2 sons that would have been buried there. But again, there's no way of proving it or disproving it. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. And by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of fire, in a cloud to guide them on their way, and at night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel by day or by night. Neither the pillar or cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. That is, until they get to the Red Sea. When they get to the Red Sea, they are inside of a group of mountains. There's a pass that goes through, but there's mountains to the left and mountains to the right. Large area where they could have camped and prepared to move on from there. But there's really nowhere to go if somebody comes through that pass. You're just there. And the Israelites were kind of at a disadvantage militarily, or at least it seemed that way. Verse 5 of chapter 14. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite of Baal-zephon. And again, we think we know where those ancient cities are, but it's very difficult in the Middle East once something has been covered with sand long enough to decide exactly what is what. So the exact place that this happened is perhaps, at least at this point, lost to history. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Now just put that one in the back of your mind. This isn't the last time that they'll come up with this kind of nonsense argument. Every time they run into a hurdle, their answer is, "You should have just left us in Egypt. I can't believe you brought us out here to die. If God wanted to kill us, he could have killed us over there just as easy. We wouldn't have had to walk so far." They were just constantly bickering and bellowing about the reasons why God was doing things the way he was doing them. Now, verses 13 and 14, some of the best sermon material ever written. Okay, so pay attention to this. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance that the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Just hush. Be still. Wait. Watch. Pay attention. This is the same God who brought all of those plagues against the Egyptians while you sat safely in Goshen. Same one. Nothing has changed. This is the same God that, maybe a couple of nights ago killed all the Egyptian firstborn but let you go free. Why don't you understand that this God can finish what he started? And so, of course, the Lord says to Moses, "Why are you crying out? Why are you so worried? Get the staff, hold it over the water." The water opens up, and the Israelites pass through on dry land. How long did that take? A while, right? You've got probably in the neighborhood of 1.6 to 2 million people, plus herds, plus whoever it was that came along. We don't know who these other people came with them might be. Is that Egyptians? Is that other slave people that were living in Egypt nearby? We don't know exactly who these folks were. The ancients called this whole bunch the Habiru, the wanderers, right? So you've got a big bunch of folks who come walking up out of Egypt, and there's just tons and tons of these people. It would take a long, long time for them to get across the sea. Well, while they're going, their leader, the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, moves. He goes from ahead of them to behind them. And by going behind them, the Egyptians are clouded up. They can't proceed, but the Israelites are able to go. So they've got dry land, they've got visibility, and they go. So as long as was necessary, that group crosses over the Red Sea to the other side. When the Egyptians try to follow, then God gets his final revenge. He just pours the water in on them and destroys them. One of the things that this archaeologist, we'll call him, believes that he has found is old wagon wheels, chariot wheels under the water. He doesn't believe, most of the scholars believe that this took place fairly far north. He believes that it took place quite a ways farther south, nearer to the Sinai Peninsula. But again, it's very, very difficult to get any kind of real knowledge about it. But God brings them out with a mighty hand and destroys the Egyptian army in the process. Now, wouldn't you think that if you were in that group, that you were on the far side of the sea, and you were looking back where you had been a few hours ago, and the water completely covers up the army of Egypt, don't you think that at that point you would say, God's got this. It's going to be all right. All we have to do is follow Moses and follow Aaron and do what God tells us to do. The problem with miracles is you're only as good as your last miracle, right? It happened among the Israelites. It happened to Jesus when he was doing his ministry. You remember he feeds 5,000 men plus women and children with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He goes around to the other side of the lake, and they follow him, or they meet him over there. He says, the only reason you came over here is because I fed you. There's something more important going on here than just showing you more miracles. But they always wanted to see more miracles. When he was taken before Herod during his trial, all Herod wanted was to see a miracle. And Jesus wouldn't do a miracle for him, so he just sends him back. People like the fantastic. And if you can show me your power right now, I'll believe right now. But what does that do next week? Right? Well, I'm going to leave off teaching and go to preaching. Modern day application. One of the things that Moses said was, be still. God's got this. In our own lives, we need to realize that when we get worried and when we get confused and bent out of shape, that it's because our faith is being tested, it's being pushed to the limit, and we need to be quiet and quit trying to fix everything ourselves and realize that God's got this. And the second part of that would be, once you've seen him do it 1,000 times in your life, why are you still so afraid? Now, I don't know about your life, but I do know about mine. And this is a problem for me. It always has been. I have a worried mind. If you show me a kid and a car, my mind immediately sees the kid and the car getting together. I worry about stuff that I shouldn't worry about. And Moses would tell me, Jay, just be still. God's got this. God is able to take care. He can finish what he starts. And I know that there are others that suffer with those same kinds of things. We need to be more in prayer. We need to trust more. We need to let our faith drive our thinking rather than our fear. That's some of the stuff that I learned this week. That's good stuff. It really is. And I don't care how good an actor Charlton Heston is. You can't do this justice, right? There's just no way to do this justice, what God did for Israel when he brought them up out of Egypt. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Well, if there's some way we can help you by way of a public response, we'd love to do that as we sing.